Hello, boys and girls. This is Miss Little, and I'm going to read the story U.S. Army Fighting Forces by Jason Cooper. Chapter 1. Defending the United States. The U.S. Army's job is to defend the United States and her interests on land. The Army is the largest and oldest of the nation's armed services. It has about 480,000 men and women on active duty. It has more than 500,000 soldiers in the reserve and in the National Guard. The Army also has more than 200,000 civilian workers. Civilians are not enlisted members of the Army. The U.S. Army is not the biggest of the world's armies, but it is highly trained and skilled, and it is equipped with the world's most modern equipment and weapons. Army units can be sent quickly to anywhere in the world to act with force or as keepers of the peace. Boys and girls, look at the picture on the bottom of this page. The caption says, Army troops and tanks help defend America and her interests. The United States has Army soldiers at bases in Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, parts of Latin America, and elsewhere. Army soldiers provide a service to their country. Life in the Army can be an adventure and a wonderful learning experience. It can also be dangerous. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers have died defending the United States and its allies. Boys and girls, look at the picture. The caption says, the Army has had many thousands of heroes who did their jobs despite great danger. Here, two World War II infantrymen take shelter by a tank during a break in the fighting in Geech, Germany in December 1944. Chapter 2. The U.S. Army at Work. The Army never wants war, but the Army's job is to be prepared to use force if it must. If an enemy threatens the Army and the other armed services can rush to the nation's defense. In peacetime, the Army can be called upon to assist the victims of major floods, fires, and storms. In addition, the Army does public work through its Army Corps of Engineers. These include dredging and building dams and canals for flood control. Boys and girls, look at the picture on the next page. The caption says, a section of Charleston, South Carolina lies in ruin after Americans fought Americans during the Civil War. Chapter 3. The Army Command. Soldiers in the Army take orders from officers like lieutenants, majors, or generals, but officers take orders too. Some officers have a higher rank than other officers. High-ranking officers give orders to lower-ranking officers. Even the Army's highest-ranking officers, though, take orders. The Army's number one commander is a civilian, the President of the United States. The President is the commander-in-chief of all the armed forces. When the most important military decisions have to be made, the President makes them. The Army also has other civilian bosses. One is the Secretary of the Army. The Secretary of the Army is the chief of the Department of the Army. That department is part of the U.S. government's Department of Defense. The Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps are all managed by the Department of Defense. The Secretary of Defense is the Secretary of the Army's boss. Boys and girls, look at the picture on this page. The caption says, American soldiers invaded France on D-Day, June 6, 1944. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, that's on the left, gave the order of the day to American paratroopers. Full victory, nothing else. Chapter 4, Life in the Army. The Army is made up of volunteers. No one has to join the Army or any other American armed service. The armed services recruit men and women to join them. Men and women between the ages of 17 and 35 can enlist in the Army. They must be able to pass the Army's physical and written tests. A person can enlist in the Army for a term of 2 to 6 years. Some people who enlist in the Army make careers of their work. Boys and girls, look at the picture on page 13. The caption says, recruits can continue Army school to learn very special skills like flying helicopters. Recruits undergo basic training at an Army training base. They learn skills such as how to march and how to handle weapons. They learn first aid, the use of a compass, and combat skills. They learn Army discipline and how to work together as a team. A few Army soldiers belong to special operation units. Each of these groups is specially trained and highly skilled. The Army Rangers, for example, are trained in nighttime attack. Boys and girls, look at the picture on page 14. The caption says, an Army Special Forces Green Beret officer watches an action drill with his men. The Army Special Forces, often called the Green Berets, are outstanding fighters and foreign language specialists. The Army has several other special operations groups. Army soldiers have several paths to becoming officers. About 3 of every 4 Army officers began their careers in the Army ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. One of them is Colin Powell. He was a general before becoming the U.S. Secretary of State in 2001. The Army also trains officers at the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. The U.S. Military Academy is the oldest of the service academies. It was founded in 1802. Many of America's most famous military officers went to West Point. Among them were Dwight D. Eisenhower, Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Douglas MacArthur, George Patton, and George Armstrong Custer. Chapter 5, Army Weapons. The U.S. Army weapons range from aircraft and guided missiles to hand grenades and rifles. The Army is also equipped with machine guns, mortars, tanks, flamethrowers, big cannon-like guns. The Army has several different groups that are prepared to fight enemy forces. The largest of the Army groups is the infantry. Infantry soldiers generally fight on their feet. They may enter a battle, however, by other means, such as parachute or helicopter. Boys and girls, look at the picture on page 19. The caption says, a soldier equipped with night vision goggles aims a grenade launcher. The launcher has an infrared aiming light to work in darkness. Army artillery units fire big guns onto enemy positions. Artillery guns are often used before the infantry or armed unit attack. The Army's howitzers fire shells as far as 13 miles. Other rocket-fired artillery weapons can fire shells even further. The Army's fighting vehicles make up its armed groups. The best-known armed vehicles are tanks. The Army's heavily armed and extremely fast Abrams tanks was an important fighting vehicle in Iraq in 2003. The Army does not fly high-powered attack jets, but it does have aircraft to aid its overall missions. Army planes are used for many purposes. Big transport planes are used to haul Army soldiers from place to place. Other planes are used to spy on enemy positions and take photos from the air. Spotter planes find enemy positions and tell auxiliary units where to aim. The Army's mission units have many kinds of ground-to-air and ground-to-ground missions. The Pershing II mission, for example, is a long-range ground-to-ground mission. It is fired from a ground support at a ground target up to 1,100 miles away. Boys and girls, look at the picture on page 22. The caption says, an Apache Longbow helicopter whirls over Texas during a training flight. Chapter 6. The Army's Beginning. Each American colony had its own little army in 1775. As the Revolutionary War with England became likely, the colonies made a decision. They would build an army with men from all the colonies. On June 14, 1775, the Continental Congress acted to create the Continental Army. That was the beginning of the United States Army. Of course, until the colonies pushed British soldiers off American soil, there would be no United States. The first mission of General George Washington's ragged little army seemed impossible, but Washington and his men did the impossible. The British left America in defeat. The colonies would have a new army, the United States Army. The American Army rebuilt some of its strength and size in the Second War against the British. It later fought Mexico. That was the first time American soldiers had been sent into land battle outside the country. Boys and girls, look at the picture on page 25. The caption states, an old painting shows General George Washington on his horse during his army's retreat to Long Island, New York in 1776. The nation split in two when Southern states tried to create their own nation in 1861. President Abraham Lincoln and Congress would not permit a breakup of the country. The Civil War followed. Both Northern and Southern armies grew. The Army fought huge bloody battles at such places as Shiloh, Gettysburg, Antietam, Richmond, Atlanta, Fredericksburg, and Bull Run. During that time, Army warfare began to change. The railroad was widely used. The telegraph became important. The Army used observation balloons. The first machine guns and repeating rifles were brought to the battlefield. Artillery became more accurate and more deadly. By the end of the Civil War, the Union Army had about 1 million men in uniform, but it soon trimmed down to 25,000. This is the army that fought American Indians. By 1886, the Indian Wars were over, but the Army faced new challenges. The Army fought in the Spanish-American War. In 1917 and 1918, the U.S. Army helped the English and French armies defeat Germany in World War I. Boys and girls, look at the picture at the bottom of this page. The caption reads, Union soldiers of the 1st Connecticut Heavy Artillery stand by their mortars. These artillery weapons fired at Confederate troops defending Yorktown, Virginia in April 1862. America was not prepared for another war in Europe. When World War II began, the American Army had just 190 soldiers, but by 1945 it had more than 8 million. Army troops fought in both the Atlantic and Pacific areas of the war. The Army was downsized after World War II. In 1950, it began growing again when North Korea attacked South Korea. It grew to more than 1.5 million American soldiers. The Korean War ended in 1953. The Vietnam War was the American Army's longest war. The United States hoped to stop North Vietnam from taking over South Vietnam. America sent very few soldiers to Vietnam at first, but by 1969, more than 350 Army soldiers were in the country. In 1973, the United States pulled its armed forces from Vietnam. North Vietnam then took over South, making North and South Vietnam a single nation in 1975. The modern U.S. Army is mobile, powerful, and highly trained. It continues to help keep peace while remaining always battle ready. The U.S. Army was again in action during the Persian Gulf War against Iraq in February 1991. The Army helped bring about a quick and complete victory. Army troops were also sent into battle against Afghanistan in 2001 and against Iraq in 2003. Boys and girls, look at the picture at the bottom of this page. The caption says, Modern day Army airborne troops land during training exercise. The men jump from Air Force C-141 Starlifter airplanes. The end. Boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed this story just as much as I did.